So, I have a question for you. When you're reading a book, what's your preference? Are you a person who prefers physical copies of books? Are you a person that prefers to read maybe from a Kindle? Or maybe you're a person who prefers to read an audiobook. We'll discuss preferences next. So if you're an avid reader, you've probably read books in pretty much all the relevant or prominent formats. You've probably read physical books, hard copy or paperback. You've probably read, increasingly I suspect, a book on maybe your Kindle device. And you've probably, maybe when you're driving in a car on a long trip, you've listened to an audiobook. So the question is, which one do you prefer? And for me, I've read all three. Or I should say I've read and listened to all three, all in the last month actually. I recently finished an audiobook that I listened to at various times, usually before bed or usually just waking up in the morning and sometimes in the car. And I've also read increasingly in the last probably 2 to 3 years, many more books on my Kindle Fire device. But I have to tell you, my narrow preference is to read physical copies of books. And part of it is I feel like there's a retention edge that I get from reading a physical copy of a book that I can hold in my hand. Plus, I like to highlight parts in books. Now, you can do this on the Kindle, and it actually is really cool, the things that you can do on Kindle in terms of highlighting pieces. And if you read certain Kindle books, you'll see parts that many other readers have highlighted, especially in popular books. And that can be very helpful. So you can do that, so to speak, digitally with a Kindle book. But there's something about having a physical copy of a book that you can read, that you can get your yellow highlighter or pink or green highlighter out and you can highlight things, or you can put your tabs in that allow you to go back easily to places that you may have left off and places that you want to go back to reread something if you need that context from something from a place that you're at now, but you need to go back to get that context for something that you're currently reading. It's a lot easier to do it when you have a physical copy of a book. And so for me, it's a physical book that's I give a slight preference over a Kindle book, but I've read a ton of Kindle books in the last 2 to 3 years. And so that's something I'm sure is probably going to continue. But I will say one of the things that I really enjoy doing, I don't get to do it quite as much, but when I get an opportunity to go to a nice bookstore, I do it. You know, when I was in high school and college, I went to bookstores all the time looking for little gems. I really liked going to used bookstores quite a bit because you can find some really cool books at just incredible prices when you go to used bookstores that are like just literally hidden gems that are right out there just waiting for somebody to come in and just to work their way through a bookstore. If you go to the right bookstore, you can lose yourself in that bookstore for hours and just feel like you're in heaven. And you can look up and you go in there when it's daylight outside, and by the time you leave out, the bookstore owner or bookstore manager is practically running you out of the place. And so the physical books are still quite significant to me. I just really like to have the physical copy of the book in my hands. It's just something that just feels really good. It helps me, I think, from a retention standpoint a lot more. I think from a retention standpoint, really processing what I read, the physical book is best for me. And then next is the Kindle book. I'm feeling more and more comfortable in terms of remembering and processing the things that I read in Kindle books. For audiobooks, I think with fiction, it doesn't work for me quite as much, but with nonfiction, I feel like the audiobooks, that's probably where I've had most comfort, is listening to audiobooks. Usually I listen to like motivational books and self-help type books, books about leadership and professional and personal development books. Those are the ones that I think for me are more conducive to listening to an audiobook. And so I don't know what your preference is. Maybe you can let me know what your preference is. But for me, I think it's narrowly the physical book, the hard copy, usually a bigger hard copy or a bigger, kind of a thicker paperback book that is going to do it for me. Sometimes the smaller paperback books are not as fun for me to read. I have really large hands, and so sometimes it's just not very comfortable for me to try to read a smaller book. But you know, to each their own. Everybody has their own preferences, and I'd be curious to hear what other people's preferences are as far as what type of book format they prefer, whether it's the physical book, the hard copy, or the paperback book, whether it's the Kindle book, or if you have a Nook or whatever you have that you can read digitally, or if it's an audiobook that maybe you listen to when you're in your car on the road trip, or when you're at your desk in the office, or you're at home getting ready for bed and you want to have something going on in your ear as you get ready to go to Lullaby Land. So let me know what you think about what your preferred book format is. Again, whether it's that physical book, the paperback or hardcover, whether it's the Kindle digital book, or whether it's an audio book. No matter what your format preference is, hopefully you're reading and reading a lot, because reading, as they used to say in the old days, and probably is still true today, reading is fundamental, and it's a great way to get exercise for the imagination.